If the default is always no, they have to do an extra step. They have to prove that it was worse.
Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
So, did you see the story about the cost of denial?
I did, yes.
Yeah. So, Billy Hirsch of Tulsa and his family, after 2 hailstorms, many contractors told them they needed a new roof, but State Farm, who insured them, first said that the roof was in fair condition, and after the second storm, they acknowledged minor damage, but still refused to pay. The Hirsches borrowed against the equity in their home for a $22,000 roof, and now they're suing State Farm, as is the Oklahoma Attorney General. It is alleged that they're looking into whether racketeering or RICO violations occurred here. Initially, at first, I was quite unclear as to how or why that would be, because I just thought, does there need to be a conspiracy? I guess I really just didn't understand how insurance worked in this case. I thought, isn't it just in the insurance company's interest to make money and deny claims? Would they need to collaborate to do this? Then I looked into it. It's like, yeah, initially they send out their adjusters, but then the insurance commissioner of a state can determine based on the policy whether something needs to be covered, and they can go to court as well. So we imagine, especially in health insurance, that claims are being unduly denied. And here we see actually, allegedly, an example of that as far as home insurance goes. What did you think of this story?
Yeah, so when I thought of this story, I read into it a bit, and one of the allegations is that they're using AI to accomplish a couple of tasks, and the two big ones are to delay and to deny, right? So delay is pretty straightforward. When you file a claim, there's a limited window in order to get repairs done and all that before it becomes even more expensive in the long that the longer something is damaged, say there's rot or something or mold or some kind of fracture, where unless you repair it pretty much immediately, right, it gets worse and worse progressively. And so then the claims become much more expensive and you have to get bigger estimates, and it leaves a greater window for negotiating down the payment. The idea of insurance, as I understand it, is that people pool risk, right? That they put money into a big pool, and then ostensibly only a few of the people who are paying into it actually ever get paid out to pay for repairs and all that. But the idea behind it is that people are driven obviously by incentives, and that one way you can get people to cooperate on something like this is to give them the incentive that if they all contribute a little bit and cover each other's expenses, that if the worst should happen to them, they too will then have their expenses covered. That's the idea, right?
Yeah.
The two issues with that idea is one, fraud from those who are making claims. And that's an issue that the insurers obviously run into, where if somebody files a false claim, they say that damage happened that didn't happen, then the responsibility is ultimately on the insurer to not pay out that claim. So they have to investigate, they have to figure out what's actually stated in the claim is what's stated, and that costs money and time. The other side, and this is where the allegations are happening from those who are paying into the insurance, is the allegation of fraud from the insurer. So one of the questions you asked in the show notes was, has there ever been a RICO statute used against an insurer? The answer to that question is yes. It went to the Supreme Court, and the insurer lost. It was Humana Inc. versus Forsyth in the 1990s over alleged actions that happened in the 1980s. And the idea that was happening there was that people were filing insurance claims when they were receiving healthcare treatment from medical centers. And there were two rates that were paid. There was the rate paid by someone who was covered by insurance, that they had to pay a deductible up to a certain amount. So you understand how deductibles work, where I pay insurance,
Yeah.
but then part of that's out of pocket. And then there's the rate that the insurer pays when somebody goes to see a doctor or a hospital or something, and they negotiate that rate on their own and then pay that rate. So there's two rates that are paid. What was happening was that Humana, again, this is just for me reading the Supreme Court case, was that Humana was getting a discounted rate from the healthcare providers, but the patients were not receiving a discounted rate. And Humana wasn't telling them that they were getting a discounted rate. So Humana was charging people premiums for health insurance while those people were also paying full freight for the whatever the deductible was when they went and saw a healthcare provider, which could lead to a lot of money. And they were effectively being charged in two ways. So Humana was making a profit because they were paying a discounted amount while still receiving the full premium for whatever the amount was, as if that they were paying a non-discounted rate, and they weren't telling people. And so that's how that happened. And it was through RICO, because RICO allows a private right of action. So if somebody alleges that there's racketeering or RICO, they can personally pursue charges or damages through RICO. That's what the whole issue was. And so it went to the Supreme Court and said, yep, you can do RICO against health insurance companies, and here we are. And that now is being applied to home insurance companies, which is State Farm, in this particular story that we're talking about. And where the fraud occurs, or at least the allegations of fraud occur, is as explained in the story, when essentially they look at damage that is done and don't provide an objective assessment of what that damage is. So say you have a hole in your roof. It's a big hole. And they say, oh, that's fine. It's not a big hole. It's a small hole. The reason that they might make that distinction is the amount that they pay out, right? So if I pay into insurance and I file a claim that says I need to fix my whole roof because there's a hole in my roof, so I need to fix the hole in my roof. They go, no, you don't need to fix the whole roof. You just need to fix this tiny little hole, which isn't as big as you say it is, even though, it is, say it's like a 10-foot hole, and they say, oh, it's really 7 feet or 5 feet or something. It's because the reason for that is that they can then use semantics to finesse a lower payment that they give out, or no payment at all, that they say, oh, it's not that big of a deal, we're not going to pay out. So what it does is it creates a leverage, right? It creates a negotiating position on their end to pay less money. And the way an insurance company makes a profit is they charge money in premiums, but then don't pay out as much as the profit for their premiums. And because we've talked about this, because corporations have a duty to deliver maximum profit to shareholders, that means that they come up with creative ways to not pay out money. And the question becomes if those creative ways to not pay out money veer into the territory of fraud, of criminal fraud, right? If they're lying. Because remember, at the end of the day, people pay into insurance with the expectation that when they make a claim, that claim gets paid. If it's a legitimate claim, if it falls within the agreement that they've established, they get paid. If there's a fire and you have fire insurance and a fire burns down your living room, you get a new couch, you get a new living room, you get new walls, blinds, roof, whatever it is that constitutes a living room. Same deal here. The idea is if I pay money into the insurance, they pay me out, right, when I need it. If they don't do that, that's a problem because I already paid all this money in premiums. I can't go to another insurer and give them money and then they will pay me. No, because I've been paying in this insurer. That's the issue.
It sounds like the profit motive in this case has gone too far because the point of the insurance scheme, as you are describing it, is to take risk and distribute it across many people because I can't afford a calamity if a tree fell on my house, but could I afford 1/1000th of a tree falling on my house? Yeah. So, obviously, there's got to be an incentive for the insurance company not to give way to fraudulent contractors. Oh, this is going to cost $1 million to replace this roof. Nope. But I suppose it could probably be established statistically whether an insurance company was unduly denying claims, especially if there were neutral adjusters who could investigate the insurance company adjusters' work and see, okay, are they being truthful in their work? And we could look at that from a statistical basis. But at that point, one wonders if that apparatus would be more expensive, or whether, like, just having public insurance would be a better idea. It seems like people spend a lot on insurance, and so for the average person, like, how much of a recourse do they really have? If I go to the... Actually, my health insurance is actually pretty good. But you hear about people, going into surgery. The surgery is expensive, and they're not exactly... And, like, if complications issue from the surgery, then those have to be covered too. It's not optional. Sorry, you weren't covered in that insurance. Guess you're gonna die. Nope. We don't do it that way. But then the insurance company might say, I'm not gonna cover that. Is the recourse just to the courts? Or, what do people really have a standard recourse other than that isn't super costly, other than, like, getting the media involved?
Look, I'm not a lawyer, so you just take this with a grain of salt, but the options people have just from looking at the statistics are declare bankruptcy, right? If you declare bankruptcy, then you can't pay it because you have no money. And bankruptcy, if you really think about it, is a way that society socializes losses, right? Because bankruptcy provides protections to people so that they can't be pursued for claims from people they owe money to. It's my understanding of how bankruptcy works. And so that is one form of recourse that society offers, is that if things get really bad, you declare bankruptcy. The other forms of recourse are things like GoFundMe, right? Charity. You ask people for money and hope that they'll contribute to paying the medical bills or expenses. So it's one thing that people do. They pursue charity. In terms of what we're talking about, fraud, the only recourse really, if they want money back or they want this fixed, is through the courts, is through enforcement actions. And the reason for why that recourse even works is that the state and the federal government, for the federal government, the only insurance I can think of that the federal government provides is the National Flood Insurance Program. That's subsidized insurance because insurers wouldn't insure homes in Florida for floods. It reached a point where the government had to step in, or people weren't going to get insured for flood damage, period, because the risks were too great, because they kept having hurricanes year after year. So that's where the federal government does, in fact, provide a public alternative to private insurers because there was no private insurer option at that point. So if you want to look at a model for what can people turn to if the insurance doesn't provide money, that's it, National Flood Insurance. But anyways, going back to fraud, so usually insurance is done on a state by state basis. It's very rare for there to be, I know it's strange to think about, but each of the insurers actually have subsidiaries where they cover like a state sort of territory within a jurisdiction because they're subject to different insurance regulations and enforcement within each state. Have you ever heard of an insurance commissioner?
Yes.
Yeah, so the insurance commissioner is the first line of defense of keeping insurers honest and making sure that they're doing their job, right? That they regulate the insurance, provide oversight. And the reason that they have any leverage at all is that the state can yank a license of insurer, right? So the only way an insurer makes money is if they legally operate within the bounds of the law within a state, have a business license to operate. And the state's doomsday scenario of this insurer is way out of hand, we can't stop them, is they yank their business license, that insurer stops making money immediately. If they can't operate, they can't make money. They can't sign people up, they can't collect. So that's the leverage states have. Do they do that? Very rarely, right? Unless it's like a complete criminal enterprise. But there are other things they can do. They can do sanctions. They can do all sorts of. You can go down the chain. It's the reason why a RICO statute's effective is that you can say that everybody involved, all the way up to the upper tippy top of the organization, were all engaged in like a collective fraud. That what they were doing was essentially trying to rig the system to make more money without actually engaging in an illegal manner, right? Of if people pay insurance, they get paid out what they're owed, right? Because remember, insurance is a contract, right? I give money to some middleman, some third party, and then in return, if I need it, as long as the claim is within the bounds of what we agreed to, they're supposed to pay out. That's the whole point, right? The whole game of the moving cups or whatever of how insurance works. I don't even know how they make money, right? When they first started out, because people were getting claims paid out, but they make money somehow, right? It's baked into the cake of the premiums. But the whole point is that they have to pay out. If they don't pay out, they're not really an insurance company. They're just a company that takes money from people, right? Which those exist. It's just that eventually they get prosecuted.
A company that just takes money from people sounds an awful lot like the mob. So maybe the RICO statutes are in order here.
Yeah. So look, I get the idea behind insurance, but then greed took hold. And part of the issue, if you listen to congressional hearings, isn't just that these insurance companies aren't paying out. The other issue is that they're engaged in what might be called monopolistic practices. So they don't just have an insurance company, they also own the pharmacy and the doctors and the
Uh-huh.
hospital and the
Yeah.
medical center. So they're charging themselves at a rate they agree to, right? And then charging consumers whatever rate they charge for them to have access to them charging. It creates this whole weird pyramid of conflict of interest, right? Like, how can I trust the insurer is charging a fair rate and not padding the amount when it's paying itself, its own doctors, its own pharmacists, right? Because they're making profit on both ends. They're making profit from both the insurance and the product that the insurance covers. That seems like it shouldn't be allowed, right? That there should be a separation because ostensibly they're supposed to be in competition with each other. That the insurer is supposed to negotiate for the lowest possible rate for that those who are insured can be covered by and still pay out, and they have to negotiate. If there's no negotiation going on because they're just trying to squeeze as much value as they can out of the market, right? That's a failure, unfortunately, of democracy, of society, right? Because we're supposed to be regulating this stuff. We're supposed to put in the safeguards and the barriers and the regulatory limits of the market because it shouldn't be the case that the person who's providing the medical service is also employed by the person who's paying for the medical service. It just shouldn't be that, in my mind, that there has to be a separation. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I don't think I am. That if if the insurer has the responsibility to negotiate the best price they can for those they're insuring, how could they possibly do that if the best price for them is the one that's the most profitable from both sides, where they can squeeze as much money as they can in premiums while also paying the least out in terms of the care they're providing. It's a whole thing, but that's not every insurance company, that's only some of them. But there were congressional hearings about this where they asked them point blank, do you own the pharmacy? Do you own the health centers? Do you own blah, 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 all the X, Y, and Z? And the health insurers said, yep, we do. Okay. But that's health insurance. For home insurance, the whole issue here is it's just a subjective evaluation. It's absent an objective standard for what fine is or sufficient is. It leaves wiggle room to create doubt, and doubt is the enemy getting a secure payment of an amount that you want to fix something. So if I say I need a full roof repair and they say you need a partial roof repair or you just need a patch, like you need to just put one slat on the roof, then you have to spend money and time and energy either appealing that decision, right, by getting an adjuster or a private investigator, whatever it is, and you have to bring it up the ladder to the regulators and say, hey, and that all takes time and that takes money. And the question, it always becomes a question of trade offs. If it costs more money on my end to hire a lawyer or hire an investigator or go through the bureaucratic process to get the insurer to actually pay, the amount that they ostensibly should pay for the damage that I'm claiming is done, if it's a legitimate claim, then I'm not going to pursue that claim. And that's the game. That's where the strategy comes in on the part of insurers. If you do that 1,000 times, if you do that 10,000 times, if you do that a million times, and only a fraction of those people actually go through with the process of appealing it or counterclaiming or doing whatever the bureaucratic rigmarole is, you make money. So if the default position is always no first, if the default is always no, but maybe if you could prove that the damage is more severe than we say it is, then that puts the onus on the people making the claim that they have to do an extra step. They have to prove that it was worse. And that's where it gets really murky because the insurance can hire their own adjusters, they can hire their own investigators. It gets just really gray. It becomes a very gray area. And so you're right. There should be like a neutral or a government provided claims adjuster or somebody who can look at the situation and say, this is what, add finality to the decision. But that's not really the system we have, as far as I understand it. It's not.
Right.
And so that creates that opportunity to shenanigans, to make money in ways that are shady.
Yeah, it almost, with all the profit motives at work here, it almost makes somebody wonder whether insurance is a good idea for all but the calamities that we really have no chance of affording. So, one time, a tree, not a tree, but like a branch of a tree, fell through the back of my wife's car. It's a good thing I was taking a coffee break at the time, because it could have hit me and injured me pretty badly. But we called the insurance. We don't cover that. And I just thought, replacing it was like some hundreds of dollars. And I thought, well, they probably don't cover it, actually. But that caused me to reassess what auto insurance really was for. And think to myself, okay, it's probably better, probably more monetarily effective if I have the means to just save money, but then have the insurance for a total calamity. Or for a situation where you get into a crash and you're liable for someone else.
Auto insurance is because it's required, right? What it's for is that it's a condition for driving on the road. It's not necessarily the case that it's going to cover everything. It's for the state to recoup damages if really bad things happen. If driving a car hits a bus or hits a bridge or destroys a sidewalk or destroys a store or hits a pedestrian. There's a whole list of things where the state has to intervene, and auto insurance at least creates some guarantee that people will pay out on some amount, some level. That's at least my understanding of why auto insurance is required, is because of that. It's the liability involved. But one last thing for auto insurance, it's to create an incentive on the part of drivers to not drive recklessly.
Right.
Because if an auto insurance claim occurs, it makes the auto insurance more expensive. Eventually, it's a way to weed out really terrible drivers or only the very wealthy, because the premiums become more and more expensive the more recklessly that someone drives. So it's like a tool of social control. Look, doctor insurance exists, dentist insurance exists, like malpractice insurance exists. It's a thing.
Yeah.
It happens for Uber drivers too. They have to carry a whole separate kind of insurance because they have passengers. Like, it's a whole thing that part of the reason insurance exists as it exists in the United States has nothing to do with paying the people who are getting the insurance, has everything to do with creating an environment of public safety and conditioning people to act in a more responsible and safe manner, in particular for auto insurance, but not just for auto insurance. That some professions you're required to get insurance to do the profession. I'm thinking pilots in particular. But the one last thing I'll say for insurance is that for every type of private insurance that exists in the market, there needs to be a public alternative that's removed from the profit motive. So there needs to be some kind of infrastructure in place for every type of insurance, health insurance, home insurance, you name it, right? Any type of insurance, auto insurance, because absent that competition within the market, what you're left with is these companies that are all trying to like out maneuver each other to make squeeze the most profit they can from every single person, and that delivers in my mind a less reliable, less effective product for the end consumer in terms of insurance. So if I get insurance for health insurance coverage, for example, so that I can go to the doctor when I need it, if insurers are denying claims all the time, then that means that the end result is that less people are able to actually go to the doctor. So there needs to be some kind of public option for every type of insurance to keep all those private insurers honest, right? That they actually deliver a better product. Because the issue is that they're able to get away with shenanigans and there's no other option in the market. Like you are either left with what you have or nothing, and nothing sucks. So people choose what they have because at least it provides a chance as opposed to no chance at all. That's the issue here is that these corporations are able to get away with all sorts of, and I guess it's by design, right? That's why they lobby so heavily against public options anytime the legislation comes up. It's what happened with Obamacare. For why there was no public option is that the health insurers screamed to the heavens and the rafters with all the money. It was like, don't do this. We won't make any money. And good. If they can't make money without squeezing every last ounce of value out of people and not delivering on what they're ostensibly supposed to deliver, then the market will decide ultimately. But consumers need a choice that isn't either a terrible choice or no choice.
Substandard,
But
yeah.
no choice is also a terrible choice. Like we need something better. That's just my thought.
I agree. A substandard choice. Seems like we face a very substandard situation with the insurance markets as they are right now.
We can do better. The rest of the world has figured this out. We too can figure it out.
We can and we must. Mondays with Mike.